Thank you all for being here. Aimed at inspiring entrepreneurship across Boston University, TEDxBU Student Startup America brings together some of the brightest minds and most innovative ideas to create an environment that both sponsors and facilitates student entrepreneurship. Built upon the simple values of innovation, entrepreneurship, and social impact, TEDxBU is proud to present to you four of the most inspiring leaders in the entrepreneurial world. Through their life and achievements, these speakers have embodied the spirits of entrepreneurship and have showed us how important it is to take initiative through our ideas. Each speaker, with their own unique expertise and discipline, will help us understand why students should strive to become more aspiring entrepreneurs and how they can achieve it. Our first speaker, Jacanza Tiroglu, is the founder of Explana, the largest e-learning platform in the United States, and currently leads the Department of Business Development for Explana Learning. He is an alumni of Boston University and an inspirational international entrepreneur. Without further ado, we give way to the beginning of TEDxBU Student Startup America. Thank you and enjoy the event.
Thank you, Eduardo. Hi, my name is Jacanza Tiroglu. I'm an entrepreneur. By design, we just show you what a life of entrepreneur could be. A lot of technical difficulties, and things are not working at all times, and where you have to pretty much improvise to get going. So that was a great setup, guys. It looked like it was a mistake, but that worked out. I named my presentation Entrepreneurial Journey. I could come out here, give you guys all the details about like what you could be doing, what you should be doing. I'd much rather take you through what I experienced pretty much from birth on to this day, and then I'll sprinkle some ideas along the way. I'll walk you through some of my background, my first big idea, how did I get introduced to education and technology, how did Explana came about, and future trends that I see that I think you guys will be very interested in related to education, and a few words on what I think is the most important things you guys can focus on as entrepreneurs. And then I have a special announcement for you guys I saved for the last. So a lot of you, you read great magazines and you see things like startup success rates and 1 in 10, failure rates are great. To me, what I learned is there's no such a thing as a failure in startup. If you started something up, the experience you're going to gain from that, you're going to keep taking to the next level. And that, to me, is success in its first stage. So trick is just go for it, whatever the ideas you have, and just start it up. And 4 things I wrote here that I learned over the years that really helps me are key things like adaptability, your drive, how curious you are, and your determination in terms of how successful you're going to be. Now, story as it goes. I'm originally from Istanbul, Turkey. I put some nice, beautiful pictures for those of you who haven't been there. And as I was putting together this presentation, which is very difficult to just cram everything into 15 minutes or so, I looked back to my family and I realized I actually come from an entrepreneurial family. My grandparents on top, my grandfather started the very first baby food factory in Turkey back in the 50s, which was unheard of. He could have easily worked for my grandma's father, was a big industrialist in Turkey, and instead of getting a job from him, he just borrowed the money and just built the first, and it was very successful. My mom, while preparing us for a bunch of exams similar to SATs, she says, look, there's no real books out there that I can use to just teach them. And so she starts writing her own book, and within a year, it became the bestseller. And then she started another tape-based learning, and recently she started an education center in Istanbul. And I look back, I'm proud of what kind of a brave moves they made for their time, for what my mom did as a single mom, etc. And only thing I look back and I wish they had better advisors, better mentors. This is going to be one of the critical things for all of you guys to kind of obtain over the time. And then I come along and, elementary school, I had a bicycle shop where I encountered our first competition where the local shop's owner's son beat up my cousin, so we had to just, close down shop. That was stiff competition. And I had all these Nintendo games before, Xboxes and everything else. So I started a rental business. This is early 80s in high school. And then I did a gambling business. Many things like gambling is legal in Turkey, where you had to basically bet on what scores your classmates are going to have in any given exam. That was very successful. So, of course, these things weren't scalable. It was good early experiences. Then I fulfilled the first dream of mine, coming to the United States. I always dreamt about it. I was watching things like Miami Vice. People of a certain age will remember LA Law. So I'm like, look, I got to get there no matter what. And then my grandfather, who I showed you earlier, said, look, get into a school and you can go. So I picked Boston. I have no idea why. And my first biggest challenge was learning English. I didn't speak much. I still have an accent. So I came to their great program here, CLOP. I went through 4 years of college. And right after college, I got my first job as an accountant, believe it or not. As an entrepreneur, that's a very difficult thing to do, at a company called Cooper's on Library at the time. And then, I was getting bored. I'm like, I can't be here. So I teamed up with a professor of mine who was teaching here at the time, and we started a basketball league. Our goal was to take on NCAA and what we believed to be an injustice in the whole athletic system. The schools were creating enormous monies from the athletes, but we felt like athletes weren't getting anything back. Maybe scholarships, but the graduation rates were less than 30%. So we set out to create this league, and it was pretty good, but again, we were up against NCAA. Then NBA saw us as a threat, so within 3 years we folded. There was no money raised. This is like mid to late 90s, and it just when like the Googles of the world coming out. We were successful in securing sponsorship from then giants Lycos and Yahoo. So I learned a lot, throughout that process. And after that, I'm like, okay, you know what? This idea didn't work. I felt like I missed the whole dot-com boom. Everything was going belly up at that time. And I started helping some friends with business development. And I asked them who their clients were. They said, look, we have these clients, a Norwegian search company. And they said, we also did a small project for a company called McGraw-Hill. I'm like, I think I know that name. I'm not too familiar with. I kind of know that logo from somewhere, but I can't put two and two together. So I started researching. I'm like, oh, these guys are educational publishers. And so I went to their office. I said, look, we've done a $15,000 project for you guys, a website for one of your political science projects. And what else do you guys have? And I said, look, you were very, happy with the work we've done. Meanwhile, my friends are a shop of 3 people, a programmer, a web designer, and a business person. So they're like, look, we have a giant project coming out. It's our best-selling psychology project, and we need to ship a CD-ROM. I realized this is the time, early 2000s, when all the publishers are trying to figure out how they're going to move from books to a digital environment. They started with websites. Now they are trying to do CD-ROMs. As you know now, you have ebooks and etc. So at that point, we pitched them a price where, I came back to them, and I said, look, this project is going to cost a lot more than $15,000. We're at $100,000. What do you think? Meanwhile, I'm like scared. These guys are going to shut it down. They're like, yeah, that price is really a problem for us. You need to charge us $150,000 for this. I'm like, you guys, you want me to increase price? They're like, yep, we budgeted so much for this. If you don't use this, we're going to lose it. So I'm excited. I'm going back. Meanwhile, I'm thinking, I'm like, wait a second. My research shows these guys are $2-3 billion company. What are they doing with a 2-3 person shop in Back Bay trying to build this, what they call a very important project? Meanwhile, that project actually cost us $250,000, so we lost a lot of money. But that was the moment that I said, okay, you know what? This is the industry I want to be in. As I researched all the other publishers, I realized, look, they're in the same boat. Only challenge I had, I realized there were 3 pillars that was important for us to be a successful where things were going. Learning, which the institutions were great at, technology with the programming, and the content where publishers knew well. But nobody really just mastered all 3. And meanwhile, I have no experience in any of these things. All I see is the opportunity. So I surrounded myself with as many experts as I can find. I had some funds that I just started self-funding the company, and I launched Explana in 2004. And over the past 12 years, I get to know the company and the industry pretty well. So what we did was we developed at least a dozen products. We had one of the earliest learning management systems. We were competing with the Blackboards. Now we have Moodles and Sakai's that nobody really here likes, and nobody wants to admit that. We had those products. Our earliest product that is still being used today was our ebook platform. I think we had one of the very first flash-based ebooks in the marketplace. Trust me, that's why I'm still in this business, because some publishers are still using that same technology we built in 2004. And our new product that's coming out in a month is probably going to just make that obsolete. But it's kind of amazing how that works. So first few years, it was very successful. I generated as much as $4 or $5 million a year in just doing all these one-offs with the products we had, white labeling the learning management system. And my dream was to be the best R&D shop for these publishers, okay? I was proud of that. We were spending more money building new products than the billion-dollar companies were doing. But very soon, we started to become a competition to their internal teams, and we were making them look bad. We were doing things half the time, 1/10 of a cost what they were capable of doing. So they started cutting funding left and right. So in 2008, we started losing money more than I can imagine. So I was borrowing money from banks, I was borrowing money from parents, friends, anybody I can find. And then in 2009, early on, I realized we're just going to lose it. I need to shut this down. I said, look, let's do one more effort. I believe we can do this. We shut everything down. We just focused on our ebook platform. And we just surrounded it with some social networking elements. That led to us getting a giant project from an Elsevier publishing subsidy. And they were doing nursing books. And we beat the current market leader at the time called VitalSource. And that all of a sudden caught the attention of the largest textbook distributor in the country, called MBS. They're out of Missouri. A lot of the books you see, you get on the Barnes & Noble bookstores, it usually goes through these guys. If you have a used book, it came from these guys. So within hearing about this new platform, they approached me in May of 2009. They said, we just want to buy you out. We like this platform. We really need to go to the next level. We want to own our own technology. So they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I didn't have much of a choice. And in October, within 4 months, the deal was closed. It was, again, unheard of. That's how it went. Now, with the support they had, last year, we launched a product called Explana.com. You're welcome to check it out. I'll meet you guys afterwards. It is, to me, what's coming in the education field within the next 3 to 5 years. So pay close attention to it. It's what I call a social learning network. It combines elements of Facebook, combines elements of iTunes, Google, where a student could find any content they are looking for, any subject, whether it's free open source content we aggregated or the premium content from the publishers that we already working with. So I believe that's going to be the future. We're also hoping the site will become an R&D shop both for students, entrepreneurs like yourselves, and the teachers alike. We also have a new platform launching within the next month. It's going to be a new ebook reader that has basically XML. Now, this slide for me is important. This is where I think the education is going. That's why I want to stick to it, education and technology. The 3 things I see happening are we're going to have a lot of micro-publishing houses are coming out. So a person with the right content, because now the problem of pipelines are being solved. You don't have big publishers having to go door to door trying to sell professors or students the kind of textbooks. You're going to have a lot of micro-publishing houses, one-person shops, small shops that are coming up with stellar content. Social learning portals, Google and Pearson. Pearson is the biggest publisher out there with over $4 billion in revenue. They just announced Open Class. So it's going to have a lot of the Google Elements with Google+, the mail, the calendar, with Pearson's content in it. I'm hoping to be their bookshelf at this point with our new ebook reader. And the education app development is going to be huge. So if you're thinking of anything, go into that. I promise you I will just kind of recap by telling you what I think is important. Networking is the key thing you guys could spend time on. Build your own personal advisory board. Get yourself mentors, because anything you're doing, bounce off ideas from people like myself, your professors, your deans, your presidents of the schools. That's very key. Your team is going to be tremendously impacting your success in whatever you guys are doing. Not only the MBS bought my company because of the intellectual property we had, but they also bought it because of the team I built over the years. They kept every team. We just added a few more players, and we're still building the next generation product. Again, it's all about your passion and interest. Figure out what those are and go into those areas, because you're going to have to work crazy hours. You're going to have to face immense, challenges ahead of you. So you need to do something you're passionate about, that you're interested in. And as I mentioned before, online and mobile learning in education is going to be very, very key. The last thing I want to tell you guys, given I'm out here talking about mentorship, as Eduardo mentioned, I graduated from the school. School went through tremendous changes over the last 20 years. We didn't even talk about entrepreneurship back then. There was only one school out, on the suburbs called Babson was it. But I think BU is making great changes. We have great professors. We have a new dean, amazing president that's leading the way. So take advantage of that. So as a result, I took this opportunity. I've been meaning to do this with a friend of mine over the past few weeks. And I said, what a great way to just me announcing, I'm going to create office hours. So, entrepreneurs like yourselves could come and meet with us, and we'll have a website that I got, garageofficehours.com, and the Twitter tag, Garage Office Hours as well. So I want to be a resource to you guys and be a mentor and an advisor while you guys are trying to just do your startup. So on that note, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure.
Our next guest has had over 25 years of experience building startups. He's CEO for 3 of them, and 4 of his startups have been acquired. Recently, he was venture partner at Key Venture Partners and is an advisor and board member to several technology startups, and was Mass High Tech All-Star in 2005. Further on, he is managing director at the Office of Technology Development and director of Enterprise Programs at the Institute of Technology, Entrepreneurship, and Commercialization at Boston University. It is my pleasure to present Mr. Vineet Nishhawan.
So good evening, everybody. Eduardo gave you a little bit of my background. I'm going to talk today in true David Letterman style, the top 10 qualities of a successful entrepreneur. It's really going to sort of weave in my story in a slightly different way than Hakan's, but same sort of concept. So as Eduardo said, I have been an entrepreneur pretty much my entire career. I love that slide with all the different businesses you started with. I wish I had a slide like that, because now I think of it, my first entrepreneurial venture, believe it or not, was taking Apple II computers and stripping them, and I built this aluminum, sheet metal box to turn it into a portable computer. So, do any of you remember the Osborne Computer, which was the first real portable computer? So I made portable Apple IIs like the Osborne. But I went on to do a bunch of startups, mainly in the IT telecom space, and most recently I've sort of come to BU. I teach entrepreneurship. I see several of my students here in this class. And I'm also helping generate spin-offs from BU's research that's done, here, which people you don't realize, but BU is a new research university. We had about 100 million in research funding just 10 years ago. Now we're close to 500 million. So it's actually growing really fast. So the top 10 qualities of a successful entrepreneur. What are they? So number 10, associate with good brands. And what do I mean by that? It means graduate from a good university. There's some great brands in this town. Boston University is one of them. And you'll be associated with this brand for your whole life with that degree from BU. You want to work at world-class companies. I started a company straight out of school. I actually don't recommend that anymore. I really think it's a good idea to go work for a world-class company. And there's a reason for that. Two things. Number one, world-class companies have world-class processes. And processes may feel like bureaucracy to you, but processes are incredibly important. They're important in startups too. So learning good processes, I think, is important at the beginning of your career. Secondly, world-class companies attract world-class people. And so those people that you meet will form your colleagues and friendships and people that you start companies with your entire career. And I think that's really worthwhile to have those relationships. I went to University of Waterloo in Canada, which is an engineering school, primarily computer science and engineering. And it was a co-op system, and I did almost all my work terms at Bell Northern Research, which was the Bell Labs of Canada. And it was just a fantastic place to go. And I had decided back in, after my, I think it was in third year, my first 2 years were too much partying. But in third year, I said, I got to figure out what I'm doing here, because I'm going to graduate pretty soon. And I went to the library and did my research and eventually figured out that I wanted to be in microprocessors because it felt like the future to me. And Bell Northern Research was a place to go. And I told my advisor, that's the only job I'll accept, microprocessors at Bell Northern Research. And I did eventually get it. And it sort of set me off. So, it's these brands that you want to be associated with right in the beginning of your career. So number 9, make friends with others like you. And why do you want to do that? Because like-minded people get together and support each other. And it's really useful to have that kind of support, especially if you're going to be an entrepreneur. It's difficult to start companies. Hakan told you about some of the ups and downs in his companies. All of us have ups and downs. There's no such thing as a company that just does this. Even when it's looking like it just does this, there's lots of other things going on. And having other people around you to provide you the support in the downs is really important, and to sort of celebrate the ups. And these like-minded people, become business partners and life partners. Spouses, in a way, are like-minded. You want, like-minded people. I've always sort of associated with, entrepreneurially oriented people. I mean, in high school, one of my best friend in high school, Sanjay Shirole, today's out in Silicon Valley. He just got off a pretty successful startup, brought it to around 60 million in sales, and he's about to do another one. In college, there were a bunch of us that were entrepreneurially oriented, and it wasn't that common to be an entrepreneur, especially in Canada in the 70s. And one of them, Dave Farrar, went off to start a company right out of school, bought by Newbridge Networks. And then he left Newbridge a few years ago, started this company called Dragon Wave. They make these backhaul radios. The company's doing really well. It's publicly traded now. So these are people that I hung out with early on and made a big difference to what I was able to do in my career. Number 8, be inquisitive. I think that was one of yours, right? I think you had 4 up there. One of them was, how do you soak up knowledge, find pain points? When I buy a plane ticket, I figure it's my right for the person next to me to talk to me, even if they don't want to, because this is where you learn things. When you're out there, you're flying around, you're meeting people, when you're networking, if you're open to it, this is where the ideas come from. You listen to people, you find pain points, and ideas come to you for new businesses. And so it's really important, I think, to be open. So it's good to network, but it's also good to be open so that you're learning new things and you're not talking all the time. You're also listening to what people have to say. And the one thing I've always found is the best ideas actually come from bottom of organizations. They rarely come from the top. And one of the big advantages of being here at Boston University is, I mean, I learned so much from the students, believe it or not, because this is the bottom of the organization in a way. And that's where all the interesting ideas and thinking comes from, is the bottom of organizations. And it's important to remember that. Even as you become a CEO, never forget that your employees generally know more than you do. So number 7, you want to deliver on your promises. This is really important. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, or even if you're not, you have to deliver on your promises. People want to depend on you. Customers need to depend on you. You go and promise customers things, you have to deliver, because they're doing a whole bunch of other things that are dependent on you delivering on time, on what you've said you do, and not just on time, but on the things you say you're going to deliver on. Your family can depend on you. That's important too. You got to deliver on your promises to your family. Whether that's bringing in sufficient income to support them, or just taking your kid out for a hike. Employees have to depend on you. So it's really important to remember that there's all these people depending on you when you're an entrepreneur, and that you need to deliver on your promises. When you think of consumer companies that deliver on their promises, what's a company that comes to mind that does an incredible job of delivering on promises? Microsoft? Yeah. Anybody else? Amazon, yes. Apple, I think, does a brilliant job. When Steve Jobs passed away and the new iPhone 4 was announced, almost everybody in the beginning panned the phone, saying they were expecting a 5. This is only a 4. There's nothing magical about it. And then they started experimenting with Siri, the voice recognition app. And a week later, all the reports were about how great this app was. And I don't know, how many of you got the new iPhone? Anybody? A bunch of you. Have you used Siri at all? I use it all the time. I sit in my car dictating, emails all the time. It works brilliantly. And so here's a company that, without a lot of fanfare, delivers on its promises. Who doesn't deliver on their promises? What happened today? The super committee? Politicians, they don't deliver on their promises. They rarely deliver on their promises, and that's why nobody likes them anymore. And it's worldwide. It's not just in the U.S. I think politicians don't deliver on their promises pretty much everywhere in the world. So, being able to deliver on your promises, absolutely crucial. Number 6, be optimistic. Honestly, when you're doing a startup, everybody tells you why it's not going to succeed. The only thing you have is optimism. Honestly, big companies don't want to buy from startups because they don't know if you're going to be around. Employees don't want to join startups because you're not sure if you'll be able to meet payroll. Your parents are going to tell you to go work at IBM. So everything's sort of aligned against you in a way. Now, the great thing about America is this is a great place to do startups because you have a lot of other optimistic people around you. Those like-minded people I was talking about, you can find them here. It's harder to find those kind of people in other parts of the world. I was just, it was funny, I was just speaking to somebody from Puerto Rico before coming here, and they've got a new, not a new, but they have a university there that's just recently got accreditation, and they're thinking about, turning into a entrepreneurially focused university. And I had to prick their balloon a bit and saying, it took 60 years for this ecosystem around Boston, Cambridge to become what it is. California likewise. You can't build these things overnight, but you have to be an optimistic person. You have to start surrounding yourself with optimistic people. I'll give you an example. I was selling to, I made these rugged wireless computers that went on trucks, and Alan Hanover knows this. And I got an opportunity with this young but fast-growing company called American Freightways. They were down in Harrison, Arkansas, in the middle of nowhere. And I got there, and they'd already selected 3 potential vendors of this thing, so I was a bit late. But I got in there, I convinced the engineer that my product was better, and so he told the the buyers, the purchasing people, that he wanted to include mine in the short list, and they said no. And so I ended up going to the CFO and saying, listen, you've got absolutely nothing to lose by, including me in the short list. It's going to cost you nothing, I promise you. And it took a little bit of chutzpah to go to the CFO. They were already a pretty big company by then. They were in the hundreds of millions. That company, by the way, grew from when I ended up becoming a vendor to them. They became a very big customer of mine. And they were acquired by FedEx. So FedEx Ground is American Freightways. And that company went from a couple of $100 million to $1 billion plus in the 5 or 6 years that I was supplying to them. So you have to be optimistic. I mean, the chances of my getting that were nothing when I came in. If you had it on your sales pipeline, the probability would have been, 10%. And we're able to pull it off because we had that kind of optimism that entrepreneurs have. Be flexible. Shit happens. Startup companies rarely end up doing what they had originally started up doing. There's always course corrections. So you have to be sort of open to what's going on. You have to be able to make course corrections. Give you an example. The last company I was running, a company called Airwide, we'd started it as a mobile content delivery company in 2002. It became pretty evident very quickly to me that, and by the way, I didn't start it. I came in after the venture guys put in the Series B investment. It became pretty obvious to me that the market wasn't ready. And so we had to do a pivot into the SMS space. So SMS was starting to take off in Europe and Asia, not here in the US. I'm talking about 2003 or so. And so I sort of shifted my sales entirely to the US, hired a VP there, and we ended up becoming a fairly, number 3 in the SMS space. Grew the company to about 60 million, 130 carrier customers. We absolutely wouldn't have survived if we'd stuck to the content delivery thing. It was just the wrong time for it, for mobile content delivery. So that's what I mean by course corrections. You have to have your antenna up and be willing to change directions. Use your network. Networking is very important. There's no question. Building networks is really important. And everything happens via trusted relationships. Everything. Most jobs these days happen through trusted relationship. Customers come through trusted relationships. So it's important to form those trusted relationships. And there's so many, this area is rich with opportunities to network, right? With, entrepreneurial organizations such as Mass Challenge, TIE, TechStar, MIT Enterprise Forum. BU has its own through iTech and others. These relationships will come to help you. You'd be amazed when. Look, in a way, I'm making a switch from a technology-oriented entrepreneur to a life sciences entrepreneur because we do a lot of life sciences stuff here at BU. I belong to this CEO group called CEO Roundtable, and we were the first. I was one of the charter members. Well, that group grew really rapidly in the life sciences space, and it was kind of an instant network for me when I started doing life sciences. So those kind of networks really come in incredibly useful. And my wife always used to hate me because I tell my kids this. I said, don't always ask for permission. Just, it's easier to beg forgiveness than ask permission. I think you've heard that term. And, and it's a good idea to do that. You should, if you really believe that what you're doing is right, you got to follow that, regardless of what, other people are trying to tell you. A little simple example here at BU, when I came here and started rebuilding the Office of Technology Development, I realized I needed some lawyers in the office. And I went out and hired a lawyer and got my wrist slapped because it was the first lawyer hired outside of General Counsel's office. Now, I knew this was the right thing because it would make everybody's life better. And sure enough, it has. Now the General Counsel's office loves our lawyers. I have 3 of them now. And that's what I mean by you have to, even at my stage of career, you sometimes have to beg forgiveness and not ask permission. This is a really important one. I think, generosity, it's one of the characteristics of America that, people here do believe that the goal is to grow the pie, and when you grow the pie, there's going to be plenty to share. That you shouldn't be fighting over slices of the pie, day one. And that's what I mean by being generous. You should be generous. You should be generous with your employees. You should be generous, obviously, with your shareholders. you should be generous with your family to give them time, right? When you're in an entrepreneurial endeavor, it feels like you never have any time. And, but it's really important to keep time for your family, because in the end, that's, you know, the most important enduring thing. Companies come and go, ideas come and go. And, you know, it's always worked for me in my career that I always have sort of built other people's careers for them. And that generosity always comes back and pays you. And then, number one, never give up, right? That's a trait of a true entrepreneur, because things come at you constantly and you have to find a way to endure and keep going. Everybody's going to give you reasons why you're not going to succeed. You know, your friends are going to call you nuts. Your parents are going to want you to go get a salary. They want to kick you out of their house, in case you're hanging out the house still. But you never give up. And, you know, a really great example of that is you know, a company that I'm on the board of called Nextworth, started by a Babson entrepreneur. And you can't even believe this ride we've had, but now we're in Target, and you can sort of take your old iPods and stuff and trade them in through the Nextworth platform. But here's an entrepreneur, David Chen, who just will not give up, and it's quite amazing. But I want to thank you, and enjoy your next speaker.
Next, we have the privilege of having an innovative entrepreneur and pioneer in the industry of art, Hugh O'Donnell. Mr. O'Donnell has had over 30 years of experience as an innovative artist. His passion for teaching has led him to lead positions such as Director of the School of Visual Arts at Boston University, Professor of Painting at the College of Fine Arts, as well as Chair of Undergraduate Painting at the School of Visual Arts at Boston University. He is currently an artist in residence and a professor of painting for the College of Fine Arts, and works constantly to mentor entrepreneurs who are working to create startups. It is my honor to present to you Mr. Hugh O'Donnell.
Okay, well, first of all, I've got probably far too many slides, but this is one of my problems, because I can only do this if I think visually. And and I'm also going to be talking about the fact that this is really my territory, coming from the visual. And I'm just reminded of one of my favorite poets' advice to an artist, was that there are only 3 types of people that count in the world. One is a warrior who kills, one is a priest who has faith, and the other is a poet who creates. Everybody else needs to be taxed and drudged and relegated to the professions. So how does one maintain a status as a warrior, a priest, and a poet? Well, what we're talking about is that you need to be able to create, you need to have vision, you need to have faith in your vision, and you need to have to fight to make it work. So it's very, very true. And one of the other great pieces of advice I once got as a young student was from Ted Turner, who said his secret maxim, or his secret for success, was early to bed, early to rise, work like hell, and advertise. So this I also tell my students, because they have to start up with ideas which are just a hunch, just a mere clue, just a feather of an idea. And then they have to turn that into a sketch. They have to develop that as that little hunch that needs to grow. And as that idea grows, they need to start getting testing of the idea. They share it with their friends. If they find that the idea is too big for them, then they have to get help. Then they have to create a team, and then the idea can grow and grow and grow. And I grew up in the age of the Beatles. I think probably one of the most phenomenal things that happened in the 20th century was the advent of a band, pop bands, getting together. Just four people get together. Someone's playing lead, someone's playing rhythm, someone's playing drums, someone's playing bass, and together they change the world. They change the way people feel. They change the way people act. They change the way people think. And you don't need 25 people. You don't need 100 people. You don't need a tribe. You just need 4 or 5 good friends. And you need 4 or 5 good friends who can actually sing together, who actually kind of have a harmony together and can create and can improvise together and actually create on the spot as a group. I think that was one of the biggest breakthroughs of the 20th century. And we're seeing it now today at a time when entrepreneurism and innovation and invention was never more needed. And I keep reading that this is the biggest time ever in our lives for innovation. So, you know, I'm also very aware that the difference between invention and innovation is something that's very close to what we discover in the arts. In the arts, most artists want to get left alone so they can just keep inventing. But that can easily become just a hobby, unless you have innovation, where you actually take those inventions and you put them into practice. You apply them. How can you apply these inventions? And this is where you need to be more than a company of one. You need to be an association of other talents that come together. And while you're at a university like this, an institution like this is the time to meet your peers, to get together, to form ideas together, and to go to work together, so that when you actually leave this place, you're already running a company. That really would be my ideal to see, you know, students today actually entering the fray as working artists. Okay, because art isn't such a big deal. Being a genius is not even such a big deal, and there isn't anything that you should ask of yourselves that's less than being a genius. Because to be a genius basically is that if you ever hear anybody say something really cool and you think that really hits the spot, don't repeat it. Find a way of saying it in your own voice. Find a way of finding it in your own experience and actually talking about that from that position, and you are a genius. That's genius. I mean, everybody thinks that so many things are running out and there's less to do and there's less to invent and there's less to make. It's not true. It's the same stuff. We have got the same problems that we've had since we were walking on 2 feet. And so it's just a question of finding your own way of finding your own personal vision for that. I'm going to show you work, first of all, that I've done as an artist and how I've actually sort of broken out of being in the studio as a lone artist into working in collaboration with other people. It started for me probably when I was a little kid, and my father used to go out and work on a building site, and I had no idea what he did on the building site. So I used to try and imagine what he did on the building site, because, you know, when you haven't got something, you have to imagine it. When you're hungry, you have to imagine food. If you need love and you haven't got love, you have to imagine love. And this is how everything gets started. So I tried to imagine what it was like being on a building site. And I grew up with a real need to work with architects. I wanted to meet people who made buildings. I wanted to act in buildings. And so this led me into the visual arts and the idea of being able to put something up that could actually command a space. But I really wanted to be able to work in tandem with the people who made the buildings. So let me start going through these slides and see if you can just... some of them will have to last for a very short period of time as we move through them. So when I was a student of 19, I saw this work by Henry Matisse, which is a ceramic, and it's now in Los Angeles. It was commissioned directly from him. And I started making a painting based on these fluttery shapes. And an architect who was also a member of faculty, who was a painter, came to my studio, and he said to me, "Could you turn that into a room?" Could I ever? I mean, I was just making paintings. So he said, well, you know, is there an application where you could turn that into ceramic? And so I discovered how Matisse did this with his ceramic transfer papers, where you screen on the ceramic ink onto paper, you can float it off and put it directly onto a white tile, and you fire it in an oven. And then the nightmare begins, because you think you're going to lose all of your ceramics, everything's going to melt, and everything's going to crash and break. I had nightmares about it. But we did it. And I was 19 at the time, and it was an absolute harrowing experience, but it was wonderful to do it. And it was a taste, it was a bite of the cherry. When I left undergraduate school and graduate school, I went as far away from England as I possibly could get. And I went to study a school in Kyoto called the Rimpa School, which was started in 1615. And it was an attempt to bring together different entrepreneurs of the day, different businesses, different companies that did had different functions. One of the artists, Honami Sotatsu, was a fan maker. And then there was Koetsu, who was a gardener. There was a whole slew of people that worked together, and they came together on each other's projects. Koetsu did poetry across Korin's paintings and across Sotatsu's paintings, and they collectively had a workshop that had a grant from the shogunate. And this was an extraordinary moment. It sort of was the kind of biggest inspiration of my life. And then I went on to study the other great moment in art history in the Western world, which was the Bauhaus, which built this institution where everybody worked on the concept of a cathedral, like, you know, a huge, everybody working towards an apotheosis of their talent in this great edifice of the cathedral. But while I was in Japan, it was also an education with nature. I came back to England and started working in a studio where I was able to get space for 28 pence a square foot on the docks in London. Nobody else wanted to work there. As soon as I went down there the first day, somebody ripped up my motorcycle and trashed it. And everybody said, "You must be kidding. Do you really want to be down there?" We had 4,000 square feet with top light. Yes, I wanted to be down there. And I started making huge paintings, because if I didn't make huge paintings, I would have been all alone in this big space. And then this piece here went to a leisure centre down on the south coast. That was one of my first big site-specific pieces. Then that's a picture of me up in my home studio in London, and there's a picture of me in my East End studio, and there's a picture of me in my Broadway studio in New York, at different points in my life. It was while I was in the studio in London that I had a collaboration with a dancer who came along and said to me, "I'd really like to take some of those images that you're working with in your paintings and turn them into stage sets." And I said, "If I start to try to make that, I'll be there forever trying to make a huge painting that's 60 feet wide." She said, "Don't worry about it. We have set painters who can come in and work with you." And by God, they came in and I gave them small pieces of paper that were no bigger than, you know, like this kind of size. And they turned every little smudge, every little pencil mark, every little scrape into a perfect rendition that you could see from a huge distance. And so collaboration here was extraordinary. To be able to make something that amplifies on that level. I had a taste of what musicians feel when their work is put into an amplifier and it's heard across a huge auditorium. Shortly after that, a goldsmith came to me and wanted to turn some of the work into jewellery. This was cloisonné enamel. She had never worked with colour before. She wanted to work with colour. I developed some designs, and she made these enamels. Now they're in major museums around the world. This was another collaboration, this time done for the Riverside Studios in London, and it was, again, I did a design for this on the top of my mother's washer-dryer with the end of a paint tube. And it was scaled up and turned into this enormous, wonderful set. And it inspired a whole series of large drawings. These are the kind of drawings that I was doing in my Connecticut studio, having now moved to New York, and moved to America. Able to do large exhibitions from the trunk of a car, where each component of paper was no bigger than 3 foot square, and it could be arranged in stacks, and they could be put into the trunk of a car, and one could do an enormous exhibition from pinning the paper to the wall. This is a painting that's in the Time Warner building in New York. So that's like a direct commission for their boardroom. This is also down here in New York, in Boston, at the Millennium Hotel. There's a couple of paintings that are installed down there. You know, the hospitality industry is a huge industry for the arts. This was the first digital piece that I did. It was back in 1994, and I was invited by a digital printmaker to come and work with him. And he said to me, "We're going to make some digital pieces based on your work." And I said, I can't even type, let alone use a computer. So he says, "Think of yourself as a singer. You've got the melody. You're like an unaccompanied singer. We're going to make an instrumental version of what you do." So he said, "And I'm going to be your producer." So I thought, okay. So I sat down. He sat here. I sat there, and we started to. And I said, as long as it doesn't look like a painting, I want it to make it look like something that came out of this instrument. And we made. And then the Cordova Museum saw us working on this, and they asked us if we would produce a very, very large work for the Cordova Museum in Lincoln. And so we made one which was 120 inches high by 420 inches wide. And in 1994, that was kind of hard to do because the processing power of computers has got so much better than it was then. But we did it, and it was like standing inside the image. This was a project done recently with Apple and with a company called Artaic, where they teamed us up with different designers around Boston, and we developed ideas into mosaic forms. Artaic have got this ability to take a digital image and turn it into multiple stones, with the smallest stone being about 1/16 of an inch. And it's solid color all the way through. You can even do pavements with this stuff. So that when the trucks come along and they put salt all over the ground, it doesn't destroy them. But they're made with a robot where it constructs the pieces from designs. And so we did this kind of brainstorming at Apple by using this technology. This was a collaboration with a group of nuns who had a center in Connecticut, and they wanted windows without the lead. They didn't want the dark lead. And so, and it was an opportunity to take paintings and amplify them into a scale that would be impossible to actually do oneself physically. Because like a small brush mark that's only about this big now becomes 6-7 feet high. So it's a bit like the hand of God has just made a big brush mark across the room. And it was a solution that was developed based on what you do with automobile car windows. With car windows, you have that little bit of color at the top on the glass. That little tint of color has been silk screened onto a layer, which is then needled into the glass, and it creates this safety glass. Well, we actually took the digital images and silk screened them with this special UV cured ink, so that this thing would become light-proof, bulletproof in the glass. It's a completely innovative technique, and nobody's ever done this before because it's just such a lot of work to do. It's a labor of love. This was a project for NYU Medical Center at the Tisch Center on 31st Street in New York for the new CVC Center. They had they finally were able to get all the different cardiology disciplines under one roof, so that people weren't sort of fighting for patients and trying to get them into the wrong procedures. They had a kind of collective umbrella, and to celebrate it, they wanted to produce some art for the waiting room and also for the recovery areas. The inspiration from it was when we were in an operation where we saw somebody go through a balloon catheter that went straight into the left atrium of the heart, and it was looking for the source of an arrhythmia. And it was very moving watching this going on, because there was a 21-year-old girl on a gurney, and they were trying to induce this arrhythmia, but they couldn't get it to go because she was so drugged out. And everybody was in lead aprons, and there were computers all the way around the operating theatre. It felt like it was in an episode of MASH. It was like being on a kind of war front. I came home and looked out the window, and I saw this tree against a field of stars and the moon. And so I took the arteries of the hand and texture mapped the moon, and so began that idea. This was a project that came from the Photonics Center. I made that piece down on the entrance to St. Mary's Street, the big blue piece. Well, the scientists from the engineers from the Army Research Labs saw it and invited me to go down to Adelphi in Maryland, and they said, we'd like something like that here in the Zal building. And I said, well, I don't do war pictures. So they said, it doesn't have to be war pictures. It can be something where you get excited by the science and technology that's going on in the Zal building. The thing that moved me most was remote sensing, with hyperspectral and multispectral imaging from space, and also for power management. And we made this piece here, which, well, it features the terrain of the Chesapeake Bay area. We got the Landsat 7 satellite to take an image, and then we did progressively closer and closer shots to the lab itself. So this is actually right over the lab. That part of it's in hyperspectral. Over here, we're using LiDAR imaging and IR and RF night vision sensors. So basically all the sensors that go into that helicopter are being featured in this artwork. So when I did this, it was a strange kind of experience because what I wanted to do was to see if I could get my hands on some of the toys that the military are using, because the military get to play with so many great things. I mean, the legend has it that they invented the internet, the Defense Department invented the internet, did they? I guess they did. And radar, I mean, that came out of a defense appropriation. So the military get to play with lots of great stuff. So I thought, let's go and play, and let's get some of that great stuff, bring it back to Boston, and give it to the students to play with. This is a piece for the Life Science Center, which is just down the road in Cummington Street. This was the piece that's part of that, which is basically the birth of the blues. It's, instead of mitosis, where the egg splits, we've got the egg now filled with music. And the music is Maple Leaf Rag by Scott Joplin, and it's morphing into I've Got You Under My Skin by Cole Porter. And that's what you call evolution. It's the evolution of jazz. And in the background, you've got text from the morbid map, all the little disease genes that you want to silence. And that is the blues. This is for Verizon's corporate headquarters. And it's, this was us building an 8-screen video wall that would be part of a multitude of screens. So the video's not going to play, but that's okay. This is a piece we've just done for the Life Science Center down in Miami, for the University of Miami, all celebrating life sciences. Again, it's a multi-screen video wall, the kind of display that we badly need in Boston. This is the thing that started it all off. This is another piece that you have down on the second floor by Heather Richards, which is the Aquarium Victoria jellyfish, which we now know, of course, is the source of the luminescent gene. The protein that develops that luminosity has been, is now the, isn't it, Dr. Shimamura with two colleagues from Brown and Columbia won the Nobel Prize on the isolation of this gene. Well, when she was looking at photonics, she conjectured that wouldn't it be great if the thing that made that thing glow could be used in some kind of medical utility. And that was in 2000. Actually, she started working on it in 1997. These are other pieces that we've done in Photonics Center. When I first came to Boston, I was invited to do that piece down below on the second floor. And I told the director that I would do this for nothing if he would sponsor student artwork for this building. And he said yes. And the Photonics Center have gone on and continue to want to do student-sponsored artwork in this building. And it's not just students. It can be anybody who can get a job done. This was a piece for Sargent College, done by one of the sculpture students. Now we're into a whole thing which I started in CFA called site-specific art. And what we're doing in site-specific art is that I'm asking students to go out around the town and to bear witness to things that they feel the space needs. If you actually see something and you get a hunch that it could be improved, then you need to make an intervention in that space. And it begins as a sketch. And if it goes outside of your domain of expertise, then you have to find the help and you have to find the partners to get the job done. So it starts off with a vision, and then it starts off with really thinking practically about how you can get it done. What the students do is they go to clients, and it could be the Photonics Center or it could be the MBTA, and they say to them, we want to do a research project. We want to find something that will really develop the site that you've got in a very, very visual way. And then we will give it to you for nothing, provided you do a completely professional production on it. So the students get published. They get a bite of the cherry, the thing gets done. This was done for the MBTA stations outside of CFA. They continue to replace these images. The student who did that has now gone down to South Carolina, has been developing murals all over South Carolina. And he developed this wonderful thing called Larnopolis, which is a cardboard city built by a big bunch of high school kids. And it has LED lights flashing inside it, lighting up the city. They continue to do the signs here. And one of the students who developed one of those signs saw an ad in Craigslist for somebody asking for someone to paint one of the deceased firefighters, Sergeant Kelly, who had lost his life over at Ladder 37. And she went down and said, I'll do a picture of him. And she ended up painting 8 of the fallen firefighters. And then they said, would you paint us all? So not really quite knowing what she was getting herself into, she said yes. And she ended up painting the entire rec room up at Ladder 37, which is on Huntington Avenue, opposite the MFA. This is where these guys work out. And she's painting the city of Boston as well as the individual firefighters. But this was a job that was too much for one person. So she recruited 2 friends to get the job done, to get it finally finished. So that's Christy O'Donnell, Anya Samolnikova, and Elizabeth Menges were able to finally get it finished. This is the piece in the Metcalf Science Center that was commissioned by, it was started by Bennett Goldberg from Photonics Center, and it grew into a biology, chemistry, and physics project. This is for the School of Pharmacology, done by Raquel Reichardt, sponsored by Shelley Russick, who's professor of neuroscience. This is another piece by Daniel Roden, who's now an alum and is coming back to do a project on synesthesia for the university. It's based on strange attractors moving through the neural networks of the brain. This is a painting by Ryan Kenny in the Fit Rec Center. This is a painting for Red Bull North America on the left. This is a painting of the sneakers on the Fit Rec Center. And this student learned so much from doing this that he went on to make a proposal in South Carolina to do this building with an image based on the Hadron Collider. And he filmed himself doing it. This is advertising. He put it on YouTube, and he got a call from CERN. And they asked him if he would make a proposal for the Large Hadron Collider. And he made 18 proposals. And they said yes. And there he is at the Hadron Collider, visiting it. And there's the final mural that he finished in Geneva. And this was an example of someone just not taking no for an answer. International programs went over there and helped him get a place to stay. So Boston University really helped to facilitate this happening. And CERN went off and found the money, and he was paid to do this as a professional job. This is a really beautiful solution for that came out of the Darwin competition just a couple of years ago, and 100 students in Boston came together with ideas for celebrating the work of Charles Darwin. This is here in the Photonics Center. This is the Writing Center. This is Warren Towers. This is City Convenience Signs. This is a Google game based on Google Trends. It's the survival of the most popular, which is a processing project done by a student from computer science, which creates all these little creatures that run out foraging for food, and they can eat each other if they're more popular than each other. And you can put in different categories, any category you want. This is an interactive system for gesture recognition done with Margaret Betgay in computer science. These are a couple of guys from the Boathouse developing a mural for the Boathouse. And this is the new student village. And this is a Google map showing where all the work is on our campus. And so that's a really quick run through at a very, very quick pace. But basically I want to finish this by saying to all of the students here, the way this works is that you need to go off into Boston and you need to find out what Boston needs. And it can be, I had an idea from a girl who wanted to have a phone booth. She said, I'm so sick of making phone calls with busy streets and terrible noise. I want to be able to have an air-conditioned luxury phone booth that I can close the door on and be in complete peace and make a quiet call. And she wanted to develop this as an artwork. We could prototype something like that. It's scalable. It could be sold on. There are lots of ideas like that could start life in Boston if we can get together the right kinds of talent. We need engineers, we need computer scientists, we need medical students. It's not just painters and sculptors. We need a whole array. And we need you to start using your imagination, bring in your vision, and bring it to CFA, and we'll put it together so that you actually get the job done. So there's an opportunity. Thank you.
Our next guest is managing partner at Google Ventures and has had 25 years of experience growing businesses with innovative communications and interface-intensive applications. He has co-founded several companies such as Android and Wildfire, which have been acquired by Google and Orange Ventures, respectively. He's an innovator in technology platforms and an inspiring model of entrepreneurship. Please welcome Mr. Rich Miner.
Great. Well, let's continue this trend of trying to encourage you guys to do a little bit of innovation, if we can. I'm going to show a little video, which is reminiscent of and speaks to some innovation that I've done in my life. As mentioned, I've done a few things. This is one of them. Right, so that was Android soaring to 100 million devices sold, and that's actually about 9 months old and about a million, actually it was soaring to 1 million devices, and it has since doubled that, so we've actually now sold 200 million devices. So that was going to 100 million, we've now sold 200 million Android phones. And that's a ride that I was fortunate enough to have been a part of. As mentioned, I was co-founder of Android, co-founder of another startup, Wildfire, before then, and I'd like to talk to you about those startups, what it's like to build something like that, what it's like to be a part of that ride, and most importantly, to convince you guys that you can also be a part of that ride. Best way to do that would be for me to have my notes, which I think might have gone with the pad of paper that went away, or no? Brilliant, which I now have. So this ride that I went on, as mentioned, Android's now sold 200 million phones. Today, yesterday, tomorrow, we're averaging about 550,000 activations every single day. There are 500 different models of Android phones. They're being shipped on almost every carrier network. But the key thing is, you can start a company like Android as well. You should. I'd love to see you starting to do that now. There's no reason why you can't do that right here in the city of Boston. I've been a part of 3 startups that I was directly, in part, responsible for helping to create. And I've helped numerous other startups, all here in Boston, where we have the resources, the venture capital, the funding, the mentors, the universities, like this great university, to help you with all of the sort of building blocks, tools, and guidance that you need to create something amazing. As I mentioned, I started my startups here, I should say not long ago, but it was actually quite a while ago. This is my bad file photo of me in the research lab that I had up at UMass Lowell while I was working on my PhD. Literally some 23, 24 years ago, probably. Bad suit, bad hair, bad glasses, but in this case we were teaching 9X that you could order pizzas over their cable network. And in fact, we were live talking to a guy at Domino's who held up the pizza for the 9X guys I had assembled in the room. We also played with some hardware, as you see down below, because we didn't have the internet back then, so we had to keep ourselves a little bit preoccupied, not just fumbling with bits of software, but also with hardware. But the key thing is, I was doing research, student, frankly not great at the academics piece, much better at being passionate about things that I wanted to build, and having that passion effectively drive me through the academics, through my bachelor's, master's, and PhD, as opposed to having the academics the other way around drive me, which I don't think it really matters. The key thing is have passion about something that you want to be doing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I have a sort of philosophy about starting startups. I think there's, or at least my own experiences as to how to create really big and amazing companies. And one of them is to not know what's not possible. And that was the case in one of the first startups that I started, which was Wildfire Communications. But if you want to build something amazing, in this particular case, it was not know your limits, not know boundaries, have an amazingly big vision, even if other people say it's bold, hard, or impossible. And then if you think it's achievable, because it's not, I wouldn't suggest that you're often do something that's impossible, but if you think it's achievable, you think you see a path as to how to do it, I encourage you to go do it. We built something called Wildfire, again, about 20 years ago. Wildfire was a voice-based personal assistant that helped you effectively talk to an information system to get work done, but it was anthropomorphic. It had a personality. In our analogy, it was like ringing up an old telephone and getting Mabel back in as the operator back in the office and asking Mabel where Doc Brown was. And Mabel was that central hub for communications. She knew where everyone was, knew how to reach them, and could plug you together and get you connected. So 25 years ago, we had this vision called Wildfire. And it's funny how it's come back around, because Siri, having been launched, we're getting all these emails from people saying, hey, remember why it's just like Wildfire? But the key thing was that vision, while edge of the art and sort of bleeding on the edge of the art, we were able to build, because we constrained the problem enough, we were able to build something that was usable. Now, we weren't from the telecom industry. We didn't know that people didn't think this was possible. This was the area of DTMF touchtones. When you pressed a button on a phone, it made a tone, and that's how you navigated through menus and hierarchies. We wanted to use voice. Speech recognition worked, but nobody was really commercializing it yet. And when we were first demoing this on stage at the big conferences, people would like lift up the curtains under the table. They were looking for the person, sort of the mechanical Turk problem, where they just assumed that we were faking it. And we were able to create this illusion, build this personality, largely because we just saw no boundaries, and we wanted to deliver on this vision, and that's what we were very focused on. Now, we were venture funded. We had funding from 2 local VCs, Matrix and Greylock, which are both actively still funding companies today. Ultimately, we sold this company to Orange, the European telephone, mobile phone operator. And Orange launched Wildfire. It had a bit of a life there, but when you sell things to large telephone companies, you can never easily control their destinies. I started a venture fund there as well, as I've done, help Google do. The venture fund at Orange invested in a number of companies. One of those was a company called Danger, which was building this phone called the T-Mobile Sidekick, started by Andy Rubin. And it was with Andy that ultimately, after selling Wildfire to Orange and launching the first Windows mobile phone and having some fun for about 5 years at Orange doing innovative research and venture investing, we decided to start Android. Now, the interesting thing from Wildfire was Bill Warner, who was the original visionary and my co-founder at Wildfire, had a vision that he wanted to create the world's most popular software ever. That was his vision. And he figured, well, if I want to do that, it has to work on the telephone and spread like wildfire. That was sort of his thinking. Now, the funny thing is things sort of come around. We didn't actually do that at Wildfire, but we're sort of on the path to doing that with Android, building the most popular software ever. 200 million phones, 500,000 new per day. We're on that rocket ship to do that. But I think it's important to understand this story of Android as well, because most people don't realize Android was also a startup. A lot of people know it came from Google and see it coming from Google, but it was really just a couple of guys. Andy and another guy, Chris White, had the original idea to build an open platform. They were focused on cameras. I had tried to launch a Windows mobile phone when I was at Orange, was a little concerned that if somebody controlled this mobile phone platform, which was, these are just mobile computers, they're wirelessly connected, big screens getting bigger every day, that if somebody controlled this platform in the same way that I had seen desktops controlled, that would be bad for innovation, right? If you look at the desktop environment, very few word processors, very few spreadsheets, it's a very controlled environment. We wanted a more open world for mobile phones, and so we went down the path of setting out to design Android. And we could have been a very successful venture-funded startup. We had term sheets coming in. We had a vision for what we wanted to build. And in telling this story, we also started to go out and talk to big companies, Google being one of them, and said, hey, if we build an open phone platform, do you think Google might want to have a Google brand on a phone? Now, our goal was just to help get funding for our startup. We wanted the VCs to see name brands like Google saying, oh yeah, an open mobile phone platform sounds good. We thought it would get the valuation up. Google, however, latched onto this idea that we were, one of the slides in our deck that said, if there isn't an open mobile phone platform, somebody's going to control that ecosystem, and that's really bad. And so it was Larry Page at Google who thought that it would be a bad idea for somebody to control the mobile phone ecosystem. He saw that these things are just wirelessly connected small computers, and Larry suggested that Google acquire Android. And there was some bumpy road in between, that initial idea and it actually happening, but it's been an amazing partnership and connection ever since. And I think it's an example of my second rule, for what I think helps start innovative startups, which we'll get to in just a minute. First, though, I want to loop back to you guys and what it means to create a startup, because both inspiring is also setting expectations, because being a founder can sometimes be a lonely and challenging experience. There's, as I said, one great way to do a startup is to do something that other people think is impossible, right? So try peddling the impossible idea. It takes a while, right? Have that idea, build prototypes, show people, prototypes fall apart. But ultimately, I think the reason a number of us do it is for the thrill. We're inspired by it, right? We want to cross that chasm, get to the other side, see our idea realized, and we're not afraid ultimately to take those first couple of steps and do it. And those first couple of steps can come in many forms, right? Matching yourself up with somebody who you think you're really connected with to build the prototype, or just going and talking to people, if, don't you think X or Y is a huge problem and don't you wish there was a good solution for it, and get some, feedback from people that way? Or what if you could do X or Y, would you be excited about it? And so I think the key thing to help you get across that wire, though, is to ultimately be passionate about whatever it is that you decide you want to go off and do. Have a huge, feel it in your gut, believe that it can be done, believe that you can do it. But also, you don't necessarily have to believe that you're doing it alone. There's no reason why not to do it with others, to get support, and that's where I think, a key thing in terms of, how I look at building a startup. In my first case, I mentioned, both Avid and Wildfire. Bill Warner, who was the original founder, has been a great mentor to me both in those days and since that time. My professor back at university, Pat Krolak, an amazing resource for me and an amazing mentor in terms of convincing me that I could do certain things that I didn't think I could do, and pushing me across the edge. And then as you start to go down the path with your own idea, it's getting advice as to, what does one need to do in order to raise funding? How complete does, do you need a prototype, right? Do you need customers? Do you need to show user traction? What, do you need patents, right? There's all of these questions that you'll have as you start down this path, innovating on your own. And so mentors are terrific for that. And by the way, the passion, that I keep mentioning to doesn't just have to be your own. It can be a co-founder. So if you don't have, if you want to be a part of a startup, if you don't have that idea just yet, that what it is that you want to do, there's no reason that you can't go and seek that from somebody else who you work with, a colleague. Maybe you're talking to two people and you both have an idea. And so it's a matter of testing them out and seeing if your relationship survives picking one and having one try and drop one aside. But the key thing is either yourself or with a collective group of people try and go off and do that. And that's, again, where Boston is a fantastic resource, because if you check VentureFizz or any of the other sites that are around, you'll see that on any given week, there are, at this point, a dozen or more opportunities to go to a startup cafe and talk to somebody about your idea, or see a business plan competition set of pitches, or or just have a meetup and talk to other people about startups. So I encourage you to sort of look and see which of these opportunities, seek out these kind of social environments where you're sort of rubbing your connective tissue with other people's connective tissue and trying to, get the innovative flow going between yourself and between others. Stuttering a little bit because the great laptop is sort of giving me the spinning mouse of death, so it's not moving, but that's quite all right. I think the slide that you'll miss, unfortunately, is the slide of my 2 kids fishing. And that brings me to this, I said there were 2 rules for sort of, or that I had that I thought were for starting amazing and innovative startups. The other one, and the fishing analogy, is that is it skill or is it being where the fish are, right? So there's an amazing amount to being at the right place at the right time. And now this doesn't mean that that's the only way to be successful or that that's going to be a predictor of success. But certainly in the case of Android, had we not decided to go talk to some companies about validating our mobile phone OS idea, gone and talked to Google about that, again, we weren't trying to sell the company. We thought we could do it on our own. We would have been one of many Linux OS startups trying to revolutionize the mobile phone platform. It was that idea at the right time, right place, combined with Google, combined with the fact that the iPhone was going to be launching, which we didn't even know at the time, combined with processor speed, displays. It was this confluence of things that were happening, right place, right time. Back to the fishing analogy, you can have all the skill in the world. If there aren't fish, you're not going to catch anything. If you're in a school of mackerel, which is one of my daughter's favorites because she catches a lot of fish, you can catch mackerel very easily. You still have to have the right wiggly thing on the end of the lure to attract them. So you still have to be doing something interesting in order to get them to bite. Ultimately, I think these 2 things of, and I'm sure that the expert mentors in here can give you lots of other of their own examples from my past experience. That one of reaching for a bright and brilliant goal. And then number 2, being at the right place at the right time doesn't mean that it's only one point in time. It means working at it and continuing to work at it. And ultimately, if you believe in what you're doing, and if it's something that other people believe in, even if it takes them time to see that, the story of the Aeron chair that Herman Miller designed, and they thought was brilliant, but everybody thought was ugly until they, months and months, and after finally the first person started to say, wait, this is a great chair, and it went from all of these designers laughing at it and thinking it was the most horrible chair, it getting this amazing take-up and becoming the most successful chair ever. You just need to persist at what you're interested in doing and ultimately have it catch on and catch fire. And so with that, and with the fact that I think the slides aren't going to advance, we'll say thanks for listening and go create something amazing.